Hi, this is Justin with Virtual Hammer, and in this video we're going to go over a very important concept. In the previous videos we went over prefabs and variables and functions, but this is where we use prefabs in a special way with diagram to get some functionality that we need to do, and that the concept we're going to go over is communicating between behaviors. And it's a hard concept for some people to grasp in scripting, is how do I get the variables and modify the variables of one script to the other script? In diagram, we have to do that also. We have to communicate with other things, and we use prefabs and we use variables to do that. So all the things we learned before are things we're going to use here. In the previous video, we had our cube that we made here in our floor. So I have my cube. And we had a rigid body on it, and I think I took that off. This should just fall right now, which is fine. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to design an awesome game right now. So my awesome game is going to be, whenever I click on the red cube, I'm going to get score. I'm going to add to a score whenever I click on the red cube. It's the best game ever. There are games like Cookie Clicker or something like that. All I have to do is click, and I get scored. I can click forever and get the highest score. So it's not a great game, but it's just going to show you some functionality. And I don't want to hold that score within this cube, because I could have multiple cubes out here that I wanted to click. And if I clicked on them, I need one place to hold that score. And so this is a pretty general concept throughout games, is there's usually a place where you hold all of the game logic. And I'm going to call that game main. So I'm going to make an object that holds the score, and it's going to be separate from the cube. And it's going to say, I hold the score, and no matter what, I know the score. But this cube's going to then have to communicate with that game main to tell it, change your score when I'm clicked on. So to do that, I have the cube, and the cube has a diagram behavior on it. It still has this rigid body on it. I'm going to actually remove that because I don't want the rigid body falling, or I don't want the cube falling anymore, because I just want to be able to click on it. So if I click on it now, nothing happens, and that doesn't follow my awesome game design. So what I need to do is I need to make this object in the world that's going to control all of the game logic and hold the score. And I'm just going to create an empty game object. Right click, create empty, and I'm going to call this game main. And game main is just, all it is, it's just a transform out there. It doesn't really do anything. And I'm going to make it do something. So I'm going to add a component to this game main, and I'm going to add a virtual hammer diagram behavior. Open up my editor, because I want to, this game main isn't going to do anything in the game except hold information. So to hold information, I'm going to hold that in a variable of the game main. So I'm going to create a variable. And the score is just going to be an int, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to infinity. And I'm going to call this score. Create that. So now game main is an object in the world, and it has a behavior on it, and it holds a variable, a type int called score. And that score is 0 right now. The value of that is 0. So what I can do here is I can make this a prefab, if I want to, and I don't really need to make this a prefab because there's only going to be one game main, but it's going to show a concept that I want to talk about in this video. So I made a prefab out of this game main, and I now have to, in the cube, access this game main, because when I click on it, I want to change the value in this object, in this object's behavior. I want to change this value from this object here. So this has a component on it, and I need to get this component, this glyph behavior component, from this object over here. And that the type of component that is, if I click back, it's a glyph behavior is the type of component I want to get to that. So just like we had in rigid body here, and I can get rid of this because I got rid of the rigid body. But just like we had a rigid body container here that I had to fill in, I need a type of glyph behavior. I'm actually going to delete this. Go in here and type in glyph behavior. So I want something of type glyph behavior. And I'm going to call this main behavior because I'm going to get access to the game main's behavior. And you can see it's just a variable container. The variable is a container, and it's not assigned to anything yet. So if I brought this into here, under cube, my main behavior, and I pulled off of it, I would expect to see all of the variables, or at least the score variable, but I don't. Because this knows that, all it knows is that it's a type of glyph behavior. It could be anything's glyph behavior. I have to tell it what type of object that is. And so I could drag this one in from right here, and if I did that, I should be able to see score now. But there's an interesting thing with instances that are in the scene and prefabs. This will never save, the prefab for this will never save anything that comes from the scene in it. Now this is okay in game main because game main's always going to kind of be here and get stuff from the scene. But what I usually do is I make a prefab out of the object and I drag the prefab in. If I drag the prefab in, it's still going to show me this, but if I get the score off of this, it says prefab game main. Now I just do this because I want access to all the variables, but this is not going to be the score that updates because it's going to be this one that's not in the scene. I'm going to need to get the one I want dynamically. So when we start, I want to fill in this variable. I'm still going to need to keep this in here so that I can code the rest of this out. But when we start, I want to dynamically fill this in. And actually, I'll start and show you that in a second so you can understand it. My game design, remember, was when I click on this cube, I want to add to my score. So with the cube selected, I'm going to add a new event. And on mouse down. So this is an event that Unity calls that knows if I click on this with the mouse, if I press down on the mouse, it's going to fire off this event. And what I want to do when it fires off this event is I want to get the variable main behavior, and it knows its variable types because I filled them in, and the only reason I filled in from the prefab is so that I know the variable types in here. Score, and you can see that it says prefab game main. So this is the prefab version of this. It's actually not going to change in the scene, but at least it gives me access to know what these are going to be. And I can add to this, add one. Whenever this is clicked on, I want to add one, and I want to store it back into score. So I'm adding it, and then I'm storing it back into score. This is set, and you know it's set because it shows me these execution tabs here, and I can hook that up there. Now, whenever I click on, you can see I can do this now. Actually, I want to log this out also so you can see it. Log message so that we can see when this happens. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to click on this. And this actually works. It works because this is going to be the game main that's in here. But just for what I usually do, just to be safe, so that I know that I'm getting the actual game main I want, is I get it dynamically and fill this in. And this is always going to be the safest way to fill in what you need here to make sure I'm using the one that I want. I'm going to use something called find. I'm going to find the name of the object I want in the scene. So the name of the object I want is game main. Type it in game main. It's got to be spelled exactly like that with capitalization and everything. And off of that, this gives me the game object, which is this thing right here. What I actually want is not the whole game object. I just want this part of it. And all of these are components. I want this component, the glyph behavior component, off of this game object. So when this starts up, it's going to find this game object, and I'm going to say get component. And the component type I want is a glyph behavior. So now this knows to look for that glyph behavior on there, and from here, I could just fill in the main behavior. And you'll see, I can drag this actually over to here. And if you look, when we play this, you can actually watch this happen. This is looking at the prefab right now, but when I start, since I'm refilling this in, on start, I'm finding the game main, I'm getting its component, glyph behavior, and I'm assigning this variable that I made at runtime. As soon as I start the game, it's going to go find the right one that I want. So when I press start, you'll see that this will change to the correct one. Prefab just turns into game main, not prefab game main. It's not this one anymore. It's this one, which is the one that I really want all the time. Now, it worked in this, but if I shut the game down, if I close the game and started it again, that would not be filled out if I used, it would not be giving me the right one there. So I click, it goes back to prefab, and that's fine because, again, I'm finding the right one on start here. And we could show that that works by clicking on this. You'll see, and I'm just logging out, so it's going to come down in here. So if I click on this, it went to 20, 20. See, it kept going up because it never reset, even after I stopped. This continues to go up right here. I don't want that to happen. I want that to be at 0. And it did that because of what I did before when I was storing to this one. I don't want to store to this one. I only want to store to this one. You can see the score continues to go up. And then when I stop on game main, it goes back to 0. So now that I'm using the correct one that I want in here, it's not saving that data in here, which I didn't want to do anyway. I only used game main prefab just to get access to this. But that's my game. It's super awesome. I can play and click on this and add to my score. The big takeaway from this, though, is that I'm communicating with the variables inside of this. This score variable here is what I'm communicating with every time here. And I'm communicating with it in this cube. So on mouse down, I get the main behavior. I get its variables. And then I add one to it when I click and set that. On mouse down, and then you can see in here when I click, this is game main, it's going to talk to that. You can see right there, the score value goes up. Not doing anything in game main, I'm doing all of this in cube and speaking to that variable. So that's a little interesting, it's a little different, but we have to do it that way because these diagram behaviors are not actual scripts. They're part of this prefab, or they're part of this object itself. They're a component. So we have to tell this behavior when we create the variable what type it is so we can get access to its behaviors. So that's how you talk to other variables. We'll be doing a lot more of that when I show you guys the first project that we do. So it's pretty cool. I hope you enjoyed this and get ready to do a really cool project using this. Thank you.